Hello there, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made this swimsuit. This is the Opium Pilates swimsuit sewing pattern. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. I believe it's French. But anyways, I'm really excited about this swimsuit. I really love it. And you're probably going to be seeing lots of swimsuit tutorials from me in the near future because I have been really having fun making swimsuits lately. So let's get started with the tutorial. Okay, so first I'm going to be cutting out my swimsuit. This is with my main fabric. I'll be cutting my lining after this, but I like to cut each piece just one at a time. So making a small area of my fabric, just the right size for my pattern piece to be on the fold, and then cutting it out and then repeating that for the next piece. I just find it a lot easier to conserve fabric than if I follow the cutting diagram on the pattern envelope where I lay everything out all at once and then cut it out. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just cutting out each pattern piece individually. So I'm just going to be cutting out the one of the front bottoms, one of the back bottoms, one of the back tops, and then I'll be cutting out two of the front top pieces. Okay, next I'm cutting out my lining, and I actually have already cut this out. That's why the video is a little bit different. I cut this out earlier because I like to do a test run of my pattern using my lining fabric, and when I did this run it actually fit perfectly, so I just seam ripped my lining apart and then used that. But I just thought I would drop the video in here of when I cut out the lining fabric, which I, like I said, cut out before I cut out my main fabric to make sure that the pattern fit. So for the lining, I'm cutting out one of the front bottoms, one of the back bottoms, one of the back top, two of the front top, and then also cutting out one of the gusset pattern piece. Alright, now we're on to actually sewing the swimsuit. So the first thing is to take the back pattern piece and the two front pattern pieces and then line them up at the shoulder seams with right sides together. So you want to make sure that you have the correct front piece on the correct side so that the long tie parts are going across the center of the back rather than going out towards the outside. So I'm doing this lining up the shoulder seams with the main fabric and then also with the lining, and then I'm going to just sew those shoulder seams with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on my serger. Alright, this next part is a little tricky to explain, but basically now that our shoulder seams are sewn, I'm going to be pinning the outer fabric of the top of the swimsuit to the lining fabric with right sides together, and we're eventually going to be turning this right sides out so that all your seam allowances are going to be hidden inside on the top of the swimsuit. So I'm lining up first the shoulder seams and pinning that in place, and then I'm just going to be pinning all the way around, pinning the front to the front the front of the outer fabric to the front of the lining fabric all the way around except for the side seam area and the squared off lower area, which I ended up actually pinning it first, and then I realized I needed to take those pins out. So then I'm going to pin it all the way around the back, also except for the side seams and the squared off lower area, and then continue on around to the other side of the front, pinning all the way around, and then just sew all of those edges that I've pinned. So if you make this swimsuit pattern, I would definitely look at the diagram inside of the pattern instructions. That is super helpful. It's really clear from that graphic diagram. It's really clear where you should be sewing and where you should not be sewing. So we're going to be leaving the side seams and the lower part of each of the pattern pieces so that we can turn it right sides out after it's sewn together. So now I've got all those outer seams sewn on my top of my swimsuit. And now I'm going to be adding a little bit of elastic right there in the back cutout, just that small like U-shaped area on the back, because when I did my test run with my lining fabric, it kind of gaped a little bit, which I didn't like. So I decided to add some elastic, and looking back, I could have made it a little bit tighter and added a shorter piece of elastic. But anyways, so how I'm doing this is basically I'm just going to be sewing the elastic into that seam allowance, only within the seam allowance, with my serger, and then I'll be stretching the elastic slightly, not stretching my fabric, just the elastic, as I sew it to the seam allowance there, and that will make everything stay nice and tight as I wear it and not let it gape open at all. Okay, so now I've got my elastic sewn in, and I wasn't able to film it because I did not realize my camera was not filming while I was sewing. So you will be able to see when I do the elastic in the leg holes and things, how I sew my elastic in, but it's exactly the same as I'll do later on with the leg holes. But that's what it looks like when it's in the seam allowance. And now I am just going to be turning this swimsuit right sides out through those holes that we left open. Alright, so the top is all turned right sides out, and I'm going to give this a quick pressing with my iron to make it look all nice and make sure that the lining stays hidden on the inside. And then it is time to tackle the side seams of the top. Okay, so putting together the side seams is another thing that's a little bit hard to explain, but so basically what I'm going to be doing is lining up the right side of the front side seam with the right side of the back side seam of the outer fabrics, and then also of the lining. So I'm pulling the side seams out through the hole so that I'm able to line up the lining with the lining and the outer fabric with the outer fabric, and then I'm sewing along that. And then once you pull it all back to the right side, your side seam allowance will be hidden inside of the front of your swimsuit. Okay, so I've got the side seam sewn, and here is what it looks like from the inside where you can see my stitching. And then when I pull it to the right side, here's what it looks like. You can see everything is all neat and hidden on the inside. It's a really clever way to sew the side seams, but it was definitely hard to figure out from the pattern instructions. Okay, so next it is time to start on the bottoms. So I'm just going to be laying the back of the bottoms on top of the front, and then lining them up at the side seams and the crotch seam with right sides together. And then I'm just going to sew those 3 seams, and I'm going to be doing this with my lining as well. I've got those seams sewn, and now we just need to attach the lining to the outer fabric on the bottom. So to do that, I'm putting the lining inside of the outer fabric bottoms, and I'm putting them wrong sides together. So the nicer side of the lining is going to be facing towards the inside of the swimsuit, and the outer fabric, the nice side, is going to be facing towards the outside of the swimsuit, so they will have the wrong sides together. And then I'm just going to pin all the way around the 2 leg holes and the waistline, making sure I'm lining up all of the seams so that everything matches and is nice. And then I'm just going to serge them together around all of the edges to connect them. So you can see that now I've got my lining and my outer fabric sewn together for my bottoms, and now I just need to add in the gusset. So to sew in the gusset, I am just lining it up with the wrong side of the gusset towards the right side of the lining fabric, so that the nice side of the gusset will be facing up towards you. And then I'm just lining it up. There's some notches in the pattern that indicate where to line it up along the seam of the bottoms. So I'm lining it up, and then I'm just pinning the 2 outer edges, and then I'm just going to sew it to the swimsuit along those outer edges with my serger. The gusset is now sewn, so I just wanted to show you really quick what it looks like. So it's sewn down to the swimsuit along the outer edges, and then those 2 ends of it are still left open. So yeah, this is what it looks like, and now we're going to move on to putting in the elastic. Alright, so for the elastic, I've got 2 pieces of 1/4 inch elastic, swimwear elastic, cut here, and the pattern instructions tell you how long each piece of elastic should be, but there's going to be 1 piece that goes in the front waistline and 1 piece that goes in the back waistline, and there are some notches on the pattern that indicate where the ends of the elastic should be, and then you stretch it in between the 2 notches in order to fit onto the waistline. So I'm just looking at the pattern in order to see where the notches are and where to put my elastic, because I did not actually notch my fabric like I should have. And yeah, so that's what I'm doing. And then I'm just going to be serging the elastic to the waistline of the swimsuit on the front and the back, and just keeping the elastic within the seam allowance. And I'm going to be stretching the elastic between my 2 pins um, to get it to fit. And yeah. Okay, so I've taken my swimsuit bottoms to my serger, and now I'm just going to sew those two pieces of elastic onto the waistband area. So I just wanted to show you guys really quick how I sew my elastic onto my swimsuits. So I basically just have it pinned on the two ends, and then I'm just going to start it in the serger, making sure that my elastic is staying within the seam allowance. And not going past my original serging, and then I'm just going to serge over it, and I'm going to stretch the elastic in between the pins, trying to keep a consistent stretch on it the whole time I'm sewing, until I reach the other pin. And that's pretty much how I sew all my elastic onto my swimsuits. I stretch the elastic to fit, if it's on a portion of the swimsuit where I want it stretched. And then I just serge it within the seam allowance over my original stitching. Alrighty, so I got both those pieces of elastic sewn onto the front and the back of the waistband. And now I am going to be cutting two pieces of elastic for the leg holes. So the pattern instructions tell you how long these pieces should be. I honestly don't really remember the actual number of inches or centimeters that it was, but I actually just used the length that they said in the pattern envelope or the pattern instructions. But honestly, you should probably try these on, make sure that the length is comfortable around your leg before you actually sew them in. I probably should have done that. Thankfully it worked out, but sometimes it might be the case that the elastic is tighter or looser than you actually want it to be, and you can adjust that before you actually sew it in. So anyways, I am cutting my two pieces of elastic, and then I'm going to overlap the ends by a 1/2 centimeter and sew them together with a zigzag stitch on my regular sewing machine. So I got my ends of my elastic pieces sewn and overlapped. So now I have these nice little loops of elastic. So next we just need to sew the elastic loops into the leg holes of our swimsuit into the seam allowance, just like we did for the waistband. So in order to make sure that the stretch of the elastic is distributed evenly around the entire leg hole, I'm putting in 4 evenly spaced pins into each of the elastic pieces, and then I'm also putting 4 equally spaced pins into the leg holes of the swimsuit, and then I'm going to line up the pins in the elastic with the pins in the leg hole when I pin the elastic to the leg hole. And this will just make sure that you can then, when you're sewing it on, you can stretch between the pins, and you can feel confident that because those pins were evenly spaced around both the elastic and the leg hole, you can be confident that the stretch of the elastic is distributed evenly around the entire leg hole. It's not going to be stretched more or less in one part of the leg hole than another. So that's what I'm doing, and then I'm going to be, like I said, sewing the elastic into the leg holes. So, yep. Okay, we are getting so close to being done. So the elastic is in the leg holes, and you can see here how nice it looks. But our next step to finish off the leg holes is just to flip the elastic under towards the inside of the swimsuit so that it's hidden. And then we're just going to use, well, I used a double needle. You can use a zigzag stitch on your regular sewing machine, but just use your regular sewing machine and just stitch right all the way around the leg hole, right on top of the elastic along the edge of your leg hole to hold the elastic down, so it's nice and pretty and it's flipped to the inside and it looks all nice and neat. Alrighty, so leg holes are done and you can see how nice it looks. I really just love how the double needle looks. I don't have a cover stitch machine, so this is the closest that I could get. But if you don't want to deal with a double needle, like I said, you could just use like a zigzag stitch for this step. But yeah, I really like how the double needle looks. But anyways, we are on to our absolute last step, and that is to sew the top of the swimsuit to the bottom of the swimsuit at the side seams. So let's do that. So I'm just lining up the top with the bottom at the sides with right sides together, and I'm making sure that those side seams line up as closely as possible because it really looks nice when your side seams line up perfectly on the top and the bottom. But then I'm just going to sew with my serger. I'm going to sew the top of the swimsuit to the bottom where I pinned it at the side seams. And then we just have one last little thing to do in order to finish it off once we get the top attached to the bottom. Alrighty, so it pretty much looks like a swimsuit now. So our very last step is just going to be to turn under the elastic along the waistband there to hide it, just like we did with the leg holes. So turn under the elastic, and then on the part where the top is sewn to the bottom on the sides, you're just going to push the seam allowance down, basically just continuing around, pushing everything on the waistline down, and then sewing right along the waistband on the bottoms, not the top, right along that waistline with your double needle. So it holds the elastic down, everything looks nice and pretty, and then we are done. And once again, this is the final look. I'm super happy with it, and I'm really excited that this pattern worked out so well for me. So once again, this is the Opian Pilates swimsuit, and of course I will link it for you in the description, and I will also link where I got my fabric and stuff in case you are interested in that. And I hope you have a wonderful week, get lots of sewing done, and don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.